Well, Larry, you had a week to remember. I'm not sure anybody's had as good a week as you have this week. Elon has had a better week than you have this week. That would be one person. And the world in general has had an amazing and exciting, and I think there's a huge percentage of the world that doesn't even know how exciting a week that we've just experienced. But what is your latest victory, Larry?
Well, I just drove my Cybertruck home.
That's a pretty good one.
That's a pretty good one.
In the same 10 days that you also got your 12.3 FSD, and the same 10 or 12 days, whatever it's been, that you were down in Texas watching Starship launch.
Maybe 12 days.
10 days? How many days? I see, today's Friday.
1 week. 1 week.
Week. Starship was
I
on
left. Starship took off on
Thursday, right?
Thursday,
All
and
right,
today is Friday. It's not 1 week. It's 1 week and
okay.
8 days. Yeah.
Not a bad week, Larry.
Yeah, not a bad week.
Well, we're going to put off your description of the new Cybertruck until tomorrow. You can talk about some of your experiences with it so far. I know you've only driven it an hour, but apparently you've already learned a lot. So we'll do that. We'll do that tomorrow morning. But in the meantime, let's talk about some of the other stuff that's going on in the world that is absolutely fascinating. But I'm going to start with this. Many months ago, I can't remember exactly what month it was, Elon Musk said that Tesla was so far ahead on AGI that whoever was in second place would need a telescope to see Tesla. And I have to admit that at the time, I figured, well, that's probably true, but maybe it's hyperbolic. But you know, FSD version 12.3 has to understand the world around it like no other system. It has to respond to the world in milliseconds, not a second or 20 seconds or 30 seconds, like these language models or like DALL-E. And it has to make hundreds of decisions based on massive input, plan the action and execute it in a fraction of a second, and do that over and over and over, and it does it. So I'm convinced, Larry, Tesla is so far ahead on AGI that the rest of the world can only see it through a telescope. What do you think?
Well, I'm a little bit more reserved in my judgment.
Not again.
You know, AGI is going to be there are going to be a lot of components to AGI. And I think we are closing in on some of them. These are early days.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to declare victory at this point.
Oh, not victory. Oh, please don't misunderstand me. I'm only saying in terms of the way it understands the world around it, nothing else out there understands the world around it like FSD, and its ability to react to so many different things so fast. Nothing's in the ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of real world utility, they really are at the very vanguard of the implementation of machine learning or generative AI. I think there's a long way to go, and we don't know what the route is. I've often said on this program, and borrowing very heavily from, those who've gone before me, that the route to the pinnacle of AGI is hidden from us.
Uh-huh.
It's hidden from the peak that we think it is.
Yeah.
When we get to that peak, we may find there's a whole lot of peaks behind it. And when we get to the top of the ultimate peak of that range, we may find yet another range beyond it. Now, it's beginning to feel closer. We're beginning to feel really good about where we are getting to it. And who knows how important it is to get to AGI with the AI we have now. I mean, it is that useful and that valuable that doesn't matter whether or not we have
Right.
real AGI. And there are so many definitions now of AGI, it's really hard to say, yeah, this is AGI. It's becoming clear that AI can do some things very well that we can't do
Mhm.
as quickly or possibly even at all. Does that mean that we have AGI? I mean, after all, we can't lift the kind of weights that, a crane can lift.
Sure.
That, some of them, we can't do many of the jobs that our mechanical whiz things can do. Does that make them better than us? Does that make them more useful physical creatures than us? So my point is, the target is ephemeral and the route to it is unknown.
Right. Other than that.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, so we don't know what it is we're working towards, but one thing's for sure, one thing we can say without doubt is that some of the tools that we're developing are doing things that we've never been able to do before at the intellectual level. And those things that this tool can do are extraordinarily useful and transformative to society. There's still some problems.
Yeah.
We don't really know when it goes wrong. Well, if you're driving, you certainly know when it goes wrong. If there's a specific task that it has to perform, the target of which is visible, you can tell when it messes up. The problem is when you're asking it for an intellectual answer and it gives you one, you don't know whether it's right or wrong. And we haven't yet developed the level of testing necessary to actually confirm
Right.
that it hasn't imagined a solution that is just in its imagination, in its imagination. So I'm not willing to say, oh, Elon's companies as a group are clearly in the lead. The work that's done at Meta is extraordinary. The work that's done at OpenAI is extraordinary. The work that's done by Elon's group as a whole is extraordinary. And I think that's good enough for me.
I see. Okay. All right. So Cathie.
Long answer. I'm sorry. It's a long answer, but I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that that the complexity of the answer is very clear.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say in response is it would actually just be to repeat what I said earlier. When you have the information, the data and the compute, and you've got the proven capability to take the data, use the compute to turn it into something that works at that speed constantly and continuously and within a pretty close range of perfection, then I think there's nothing else that's in the ballpark yet of doing those things. Now, if all of a sudden DALL-E can create images that are always perfect and do it in a fraction of a second, well, yeah, that would get you a lot closer to what's happening. But, or if you are able to get it to print out a book, the large language model to print out a book in a second or less than a second that is always really, really interesting and fun and well written and there's no errors, then I would say, yeah, they're a lot closer. But
and even if it takes an hour or 3 hours, that's also okay.
Well, it'd be great, except it wouldn't be as fast as what Tesla is doing in terms of what they're doing with the car. making millions of decisions. It doesn't just have to make a decision. It has to get the data. It has to analyze the data.
Making a million decisions about one data point.
Right.
So a book would have to have a million decisions about many, many, many data points. So you can a book is a massive piece of work.
Right.
A drive end to end is a massive piece of work.
Right.
You can't, the two are not strictly comparable. But you know what? Right now, none of these large language models can print a book or anywhere near close to it.
Right.
So, but can they print an article? Can they write a program? Yeah. Can they integrate multiple APIs to a large program? Yeah, they can. Sometimes they even work. I mean, we're at a point now where they're doing really useful work in many places, but we haven't yet got to the point that they're generalized sufficiently. And we do need to put a lot of testing and checking around them. So yeah, I mean, what Tesla's doing is amazing, but I have to say that, what Meta are doing is also amazing at the science level, if not yet at the application level.
So the what do you want to call it? The next subject, but it's related subject. Cathie Wood put out a statement. This is not new, but she encapsulated her theory on the future. Well, not her theory, her group's theory, as very fast changes that are coming due because of the convergence of all these different technologies. So we've got the stuff that Meta's doing and the stuff that Tesla's doing and the stuff that's happening in the medical field, et cetera. And she says that her tweet was, or her post on X, based on first principles research that Winton ARK, that's their division, has synthesized here. ARK Invest believes that disruptive innovation will turbocharge real GDP growth from about the 3%, I would call it more like 2 to 3%, that we expect at an annual rate during the next 125 years to 6.8% during, I'm sorry, I may have said that wrong. We've been doing things at about 2 to 3% for the last, what does she say, 125 years. She's
right.
expecting it to double or more during the next 15 years. And that would, of course, create massive wealth building, lift all boats, probably actually helping the poor more than the rich. And Elon responds, wow. So what do you?
Firstly, Winton ARK is Brett Winton, her chief futurist. He's the guy's he's amazing. He's really.
And I know you're a big Cathie Wood fan, as I am.
I am, but Brett, I'm a huge fan of Brett, and his mind is incredibly fast, but is very sharp. A lot of their research is driven by him, and he has worked with Cathie for many, many years. He was at her previous post as well, worked with her there. So I haven't seen their theoretical work on this. I'd be interested to look at it, and will be very interested to read it. But I have a certain reservation about whether our growth can grow to that level, and what drives that thought is that, at the turn of the century, well, from 1860 on,
That century.
from 1860 on to the 1930s, we had the motor car, electricity, lighting, the telegraph, wireless, telephone, moving pictures,
Airplanes.
You have to think that those discoveries would have had an enormous impact even considering that we'd just been through the Industrial Revolution, and that came before all of this mechanization and electrification.
Mhm.
So the world has been through, these multiple revolutions, of which this is another.
Mhm.
Is this qualitatively and quantitatively that much greater than what we've experienced?
So
Remember that we are facing a decline, a potential decline in world population at the
right.
same time. We need to put a hold, because there's a lot of noise coming from my kitchen. I'm going to have to close this door. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Joel, could you close the door here, and could you guys go to the lounge, please? Please. Thanks. I don't know why that just right outside my office. All right. Sorry, guy. All right.
So Cathie does put it in historical perspective and says that prior to that 125 years, the world had almost always grown at a rate of 0 to 0.5%. Now that's a little hard to, absolutely guarantee that was true, but I think that a case could be made that the growth certainly from the Middle Ages until the end of the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of the 20th century, the growth was never in the kind of numbers that we had after the period you're talking about. And we've had that pretty consistently, that 2 to 3% growth. And China just went through, year after year of 10%, 12%, 15% growth. So the potential is there. And we're talking about worldwide growth, where India and Indonesia and maybe the equatorial regions of Africa and South America might be growing at extremely rapid rates because they won't have to put in the infrastructure that we have had to put in prior generations. We're already seeing that with things like the jump to cell phones and not requiring, telephone lines and whatnot. So that's, I think, part of her thinking, is that we will elevate the rest of the world very rapidly into kind of modernity, if you will.
As long as we don't destroy it. We're destroying infrastructure in Russia and Ukraine at a dizzying rate. Yeah, I mean, look, Brett and Cathie are way above my station, so I could well, I probably trust their judgment better than I would trust mine. I'm just voicing some degree of skepticism about the potential of growth.
Of course.
And growth is not even, and growth is not always done well.
Yes.
And growth often leads to enormous social upheaval, which in turn tends to impact growth. So,
Sure.
it's a complex interplay. Yeah, go ahead.
I think her main thing would be suggesting that if you take AI and you'd apply it to what's already happening in the medical world, and now you've got the AI and the medical thing happening simultaneously, these kinds of convergences are going to dramatically drop the cost of all of medicine and of medical treatment. And you start applying that here, there. We've got robotics alone, just humanoid robots. You and I have spent how many hours talking about humanoid robots and how that will impact the cost of things.
Yeah, I remember, back in 2004, 2005, 2006, having this conversation with my brother-in-law, who's the chief economist of Goldman Sachs in South Africa. And, he was expressing doubts about the American economy and where it was versus, what's happening in the rest of the world, and whether, the US economy has tapped out, blah, blah, blah. And he gave me some numbers, and I said, look, those numbers are not correct. That's the Commerce Department measuring, that's the Department of Statistics that was then in the Commerce Department measuring the weight of goods exported not the value of services, and it's all about services.
Yeah.
And that proved to be correct because our growth far outstripped anything that we, imagined. But demographics are very important, and
Oh,
the demographics are not great right now.
yeah.
So, the demographics, demographics of countries that are growing in terms of population are important, are positive, but there's so many parts of the world where the demographics are not great.
So somebody else that I have some respect for, and maybe you do too, is Meyer Thacker.
Yeah.
He is at Fresh Jiva on X, and he says the Kansas City Fed Labor Market Conditions Index is probably the most comprehensive blend of leading employment indicators measuring the strength of the U.S. job market. And it has been in contraction for 2 years and is now well below the pre-pandemic trend growth. The extent of the slowdown is rarely seen outside of recessions. Well, other than that note, though, all the rest of the stats this week, Larry, were pretty good. Almost everything we looked at this last week were on the indexes and things that came in. The Fed kind of confirmed its 3 cuts this year. At least everybody believes that's what the Fed says, even if they didn't make that absolute by any stretch of the imagination. So where are you at the end of this wild and crazy week or so in terms of your call for a recession? Are we in it? Is it still coming? Are you still 100%? Where are you at this point?
Yeah, I wake up in midnight screaming, I'm wrong. And I wake up in the morning and think, no, I'm right. And Mayer, he's pretty darn good. I mean, his analysis is very sharp. And on the other hand, there's some really good signs. Stock market keeps powering up, on earnings that haven't been that great. I mean, earnings have been very mediocre, and there are some really important warning signs. On the other hand, people still are spending money like crazy. Well, who knows? I mean, it'd be very interesting to see next month's inventory inventory numbers, retail inventory numbers. That's the number that's kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Is that inventory going down? Are orders, are they beginning to buy again? It's very complicated.
Yeah.
But, we haven't seen actual recession numbers yet in the GDP.
Right.
And until you see recession numbers in the GDP, you're not in a recession.
Yeah, so I have this crazy idea. I don't know if I've ever shared it with you, which is that the productivity, the very thing we just talked about with Cathie and with all this stuff, that the productivity numbers have been so high that we could literally get ourselves into a situation in the third and fourth quarter if the productivity numbers stay high, where the GDP could be going up, but so could the unemployment numbers, because productivity would result in layoffs and people being laid off. So we could be kind of going into a jobless growth period. We've seen this before, and it doesn't usually end well. What do you think about that theory?
It's possible. Look, in the first quarter of the 19th century, they had 3 recessions, serious recessions. They called them depressions. And this is when the motor car was coming into being, the telephone was coming into being, electricity was coming into being, and yet you had these huge cycles of up and down. Progress happens in limited geographies,
Right. Yes.
while recessions happen across the entire geography.
Right.
So you can have a very serious recession while the world is, growing at a gigantic rate. While technology is growing, I
Right.
shouldn't say the world, the technology world is growing at a fantastic rate. So it's a puzzle.
Well, that's that. On that note, so Larry, as always, it's been a ton of fun discussing this stuff with you, and we will leave it at that. We don't have, of course, pre-market or after, after. Well, we have after hours, but last time I checked, Tesla was sitting around where it closed, so it was not really moving that much in the after hours. But we'll see what happens after the weekend and whether or not the China story turns out to be true. We don't even know yet whether, Bloomberg just made it up, because there's been no confirmation anywhere that the China.
I think the numbers next week are going to disappoint.
Yeah, that'll be now a week from Tuesday, right? Yeah, it's still
Yes. Sorry, not next week, the week after. The numbers are going to disappoint. I think the stock will take a hit for a bit, depending on what other news we get, because things are moving so rapidly on the FSD front. They're moving so rapidly on the robotics front. They're moving so rapidly on the training compute front. Everybody's very excited about the training compute, but I expected this. We had the graph. They published the graph. We're right on track with the graph.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're right. Okay, Larry. Hey, again, thank you so much for Good News Friday as always, and we'll see you again tomorrow to talk about your new toy. The the only difference between a man and a boy, the price of his toy. All right, and to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.